the primary impact of certainly product marketing, messaging and positioning, like you see with positioning for advantage, the primary impact of that positioning work is in the consideration phase and later, but really starting in a very sharp way in the consideration phase. It is possible to seed concepts from later stages in the funnel into content created for earlier stages in the funnel.
You are listening to This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, a product marketing community that gives back. In this episode, Crispin Read, founder of Product Marketing Hive, discusses the buyer's journey and how product marketing can effectively make an impact on the buyer's journey. Let's get to it right now. Today, we're happy to have Crispin Read, founder of our community Product Marketing Hive, to join us. For all the new listeners, Crispin has been in product marketing and product management for more than 20 years in different roles, from product marketing manager to chief executive officer. He has worked in companies of different sizes. He's also a mentor to a few startup companies internationally, a true expert. This podcast episode is featured with some Caribbean nature sound in the background. So welcome to the show, Crispin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll see if we get some Caribbean rain.
It's very special. So today's topic is buyer's journey. Shall we dive straight into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
What does a typical buyer's journey look like in a B2B environment?
Right, yeah. So the basic structure of a buyer's journey is a sequence of stages that the buyer goes through, sometimes also referred to as a funnel. And then, so there are stages, and typical stages would be an awareness stage, a consideration stage, maybe a trial stage, maybe some additional stage where the deal is closing. And then across all of those stages, you have different roles or different personas, often referred to as a B2B persona. So different people, in other words, who are involved in the process of buying the software. You know, quite often there could be a technical role, as well as a business role, for example. So very often I would say probably always in B2B tech, there's a distinction between an awareness phase, a consideration phase, and then very often a trial phase. So the awareness phase is where the purpose of your marketing efforts at that point are to get people aware that your company exists. That's the entire goal. So they've never heard of your company, they don't know you exist, and now they do. So let's say, PMM Hive sold a CRM system, Hive CRM. People know a lot about CRM, they never heard of Hive CRM. Suddenly they've heard of Hive or Hive CRM. That's sort of mission accomplished from an awareness point of view. Once someone is aware that the brand exists, you then want them to, some of them, never all of them, because there's going to be more people who are interested in the topic than who want to buy something from you, right? So you're always going to have a very sharp fall off between the people who are happy to become aware of your company from the people who could potentially consider buying from you. But there are some people who could potentially consider buying your offer, particularly if they're in the market, for example, for a CRM system. So next stage is consideration, and that phase is about getting someone to consider the idea of partnering with you, of ultimately buying your product. But that's the whole purpose of that stage, is to get them to consider the idea. It's not to close the deal, it's not to sell them on it, it's not to make a final decision, it's just to get them to consider it. And then after that, there's going to be a stage. Often when it comes to software, there's a trial stage or an evaluation stage, and exactly how that works obviously varies a lot between companies, but it's not unusual to actually have a trial. You might, especially if the software is more sold in a more consumer-like way, you might download the software and actually try it out yourself. So, that would be a free trial. Where things are much more complicated, if it's a much heavier system that requires a lot of people, then there's still some form of evaluation. It might be proof of concept. It might involve a lot of people. You might have 20 or 30 people working on it. But the general idea is the same. You're trying it out. You might be trying out more than one solution. You're seeing how you like it. And then in a buyer's journey, there's an additional phase that I'm sort of thinking of these days. I kind of think of it as a sort of an optional phase, depending on how big the deal is, really, which is there's like a last stage. Let's say it's a very expensive piece of software that someone is buying, and it's a complex sales cycle. So you have the main decision makers have been through the consideration phase. They decided to go ahead and do an evaluation. They did the evaluation, and their conclusion is, we'd really like to buy this software. We have a strong preference, and the strong preference is for this piece of software. Now, if that was a consumer-like, low-priced sale, there's not another step. There's just, okay, swipe your credit card and buy it. If I like it, I'm going to buy it. I tried it, I like it, I'll buy it. But if it's, let's say it costs $10 million a year, there's another phase there, which is like, wait a minute, now we have to justify the economic value of this to the company. There's a lot of extra people who are coming into the process now. You've got procurement people in the process. The finance team cares. Lots of other roles show up, and they start to look for economic evidence and other things. So when it comes to sort of very high-end B2B sales, there's an additional phase where you need to provide economic justification. So that's sort of what a buyer's journey looks like. Awareness, consideration, trial, several different roles. I mean, some people would go very far on these roles, and they might have dozens of them. I think that for the generally speaking, I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's much more sensible to have a small number of roles, maybe 2 or 3. Ideally, for most companies, if you start to get more complicated than that, then things just get very difficult to manage, even with very large teams. So I would say, so what this ends up being is it sort of ends up being maybe 9 boxes, 3 stages and 3 roles. So that's what the buyer's journey is, and so that's what it is. That's what it looks like, and so then the question becomes, how do you what do you do with it? How do you apply it? How does this affect product marketing? So I guess we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yes. So that leads to my second question. When does product marketing come into the play? Yeah.
So one way to answer that question is that product marketing could be involved in any of those stages. Certainly a product marketer could be working on the awareness stage. But to me, the primary impact of certainly product marketing, messaging and positioning, like you see with positioning for advantage, the primary impact of that positioning work is in the consideration phase and later, but really starting in a very sharp way in the consideration phase. Because if you think about the awareness phase, what are you trying to do? You're trying to attract attention to the company, to the brand. You're trying to probably associate the brand with a particular space. So let's say, if you're in the marketing automation space, you might be writing content about marketing automation. The content is not about your product, it's about the space. It's about marketing challenges, marketing automation, that. So it's sort of, general category level material that you would be making at that point. And you would have done that because someone in your company had figured that was a cost-effective way to drive people to your website, right? So yes, a product so could a product marketer write that content? Yes, of course they could, because your product marketers do know the space. So they're not the worst people to write that kind of content because they know about the general space. Now, that doesn't have to be written by product marketers, though. It could be sourced from third parties. It could be written by a writing team. There's lots of good ways of doing it, and it's possible to get good and bad content from any of the approaches, right? You can get bad content from product marketers. Let's say they know the space well, but they're not good communicators for some reason. They don't write well, which isn't great for a product marketer. But there certainly are some product marketers who are not the best writers, but do have other skills, so they might not be the best people to work on that. Similarly, if you had a writer who was a great writer but didn't really understand the space, you might end up with content which is sort of misses a little bit, which can be difficult sometimes for marketing teams to spot, especially if the area is very complicated and most of the marketing team don't understand it. So product marketing people could be involved at that level, but where the real product marketing work starts to become very important is in the consideration phase, because don't forget, what you're trying to do is you're trying to shift someone's mind from, I've heard of this brand, to if I want to buy a product in this category, I think I would consider them. Not made a decision, but I think these people should be on my list, maybe on my long list, right? So you're just trying to get that idea into their heads that there's enough there that they should look for more, right? So that's really a product marketing art, is to give people enough information that is compelling enough, that differentiates you enough, and that sparks enough curiosity that the person will want to go and learn more. So it's really, that's really where product marketing skills become indispensable, because a lot of the work in product marketing is deciding what you're not going to say, right? Because there's so many things you could say. There are so many benefits and so many advantages and so many things you could say about your product. Too much information is very easy to get to when it comes to product description. So a great product marketer is going to take that down to its absolute essence, to the very bare piece of information or pieces of information that will persuade someone that they should look more deeply and get the rest of the picture. So that's product marketing. Absolutely. Now, of course, if that work is done well, if those ideas are well seeded into the mind of the buyer at that stage, then those ideas remain all the way through to close. So I would say that, yes, of course, a good product marketing piece of work can affect the consideration rate, the number of people who are aware of the brand who then consider a purchase. It can affect that rate, but it can also affect the close rate, because that those ideas have been planted, and when they're executed consistently, as I expect we'll talk about throughout the whole process, then they become, if you ask the buyer later, why did you buy, they emerge as the reasons they decided to make the purchase, right? So
yeah.
So it's consideration onwards.
I see. Many companies have identified the evolving buyer behaviors and shifted the purpose of marketing to engaging with buyers and helping them realize that we should treat our buyers as our partners of success rather than targets. What is the one thing so critical for marketers to make sure they're delivering the best buyer journey experience?
Yeah, so this idea of marketing through being helpful is very important, and of course, that affects every aspect of marketing. It goes far beyond product marketing. It's particularly relevant to the earlier stages of marketing content, because many companies have a tremendous amount of expertise in the space, which is, or could be, if they choose to let it be, could be a benefit to many people who are never going to buy their products, right? Let's say you have a really high-end, system that you can only sell to 20 customers a year. You might have expertise that could benefit thousands and thousands of people who will never buy from you. So this idea of being helpful, of sharing your expertise with the world is very important. If there's one thing, I think, with respect to this whole topic of buyer's journey, that really makes a difference, it's just embrace the fact that it exists, right? Recognize that there is a buyer's journey. And yes, you can criticize it. You can say it's a simplification and so on. And there's lots of ways you can shoot down funnels and say they're no longer relevant. But and those criticisms are partly justified and partly also nonsense, because in the end, someone does have a certain state of mind, right? Someone is either, I've just heard of your company, or they're looking into it more deeply, or they're evaluating it, right? So there's enough truth in these notions that. And also the notion of role, of course, right? And yes, there's lots of blurring between roles these days, especially, and you need to embrace that, and you need to recognize it, especially between business and IT roles. We have very business-centric IT, we have very techno-savvy business, and so there's merging there. But there's also discrete areas where there isn't overlap. When you start to get into the microservice architecture of it, that's not really a business discussion. So just embracing the fact that the buyer's journey exists. And then, what does that mean? What that means is that when you create content, you very consciously write it for a particular stage, and you don't confuse yourself and you don't confuse other people about who you're writing for. It's really about writing to an audience, right? It's like, I'm writing for an audience which is business buyers who are not considering my product yet. If you don't do this, if you don't embrace this idea, then you can end up accidentally and inadvertently producing what you thought were quite good bits of content, but when you analyze them later, you think, well, maybe not, because you might end up starting with a topic which is a broad general interest, and then suddenly you start talking about product features. It's like, wait a minute, how did that happen? I was talking about something that was of interest to thousands of people, and now it's only of interest to my customers, right? Suddenly, in chapter 3, or the second page. It's just embrace the idea that these buyer's journeys exist, and so just be very mindful of that as you create content. Who are you writing for?
Audiences, yes.
And where are they in their process?
Yeah. So there's a saying that 67% of the buyer's journey is now done digitally. I'm sure that 67% of the buyer's journey is all marketing doing its magic. I found another interesting number that Gartner Research found was when B2B buyers are considering a purchase, they spend only 17% of the time meeting with potential suppliers. So when buyers are comparing multiple suppliers, the amount of time they spend with any sales reps, maybe only 5% or 6%. That's very small. So how can product marketing effectively help this process in an especially hyper-competitive market?
So you're asking about a very competitive market. And of course, in a very competitive market, the question you have to answer is, why should I buy this product from you? right?
Yeah.
It's not why should I buy the product, it's why should I buy your product. So a lot of your marketing efforts, most of your marketing efforts are sort of focused on that fundamental question. What is it about my product that is different, that is better, that is more suitable for some buyers than everyone else's, right? So in that context, and given a situation, as you say, where the salespeople are getting maybe some face time with customers, but not very much, what is really important is consistency. Well, obviously having good positioning and good messaging that you put together in a very thoughtful way, involving all the right people from the company. But once you have that, just executing it in a very consistent way, so that what people see on the website, what people see if they download collateral, what people hear when they speak to people in the sales team, it is all consistent. Which doesn't mean that it has to be repetitive completely. There's some element of repetition, and repetition can be helpful. But it's consistent. So, in other words, behind all of this content, there is a big story. There's a story that that you've written down, and then what you've done is you have found the right way to deliver pieces of that story through these different content types. Because a website is you might end up with a story, with a narrative around your product that your CEO could spend an hour on stage at a conference, going through this narrative, but on a website you have maybe 30 words for it, right? So there's different vehicles, different types of content let you express different aspects of this overall bigger story. But if everything fits together and everything forms part of a more unified whole, the purpose of which is explicitly to differentiate your product from the competition, then all of that is going to work well. So I think that consistency is absolutely fundamental.
What are the best practices of marketing and sales collaboration to make sure that B2B buyers get this consistent experience throughout their buying journey? What the balance between the digital channels and in-person channels?
Yeah, so the key difference, of course, between sales and marketing is that marketing is about scale. Marketing is broadcast, at least to some degree, and sales is conversational. You're talking to individual people, right? I mean, that's the fundamental difference. And of course, marketers will always try to get more precise about who they're talking to, and they'll try to narrow their audiences, and that's part of what a buyer's journey does, right? The idea of a buyer's journey is that rather than only saying one thing to everybody, you do have an idea of what you want to say to different people at different stages in the cycle. But then you've gone from saying one thing to saying 9 different things, right? If you've got 3 stages and 3 roles, so it's still very much broadcast, And don't forget, you still have a website. So however you've modeled all of this, you're clicking on the product section of your website. It's not saying 9 different things. It's saying 1.
Yeah.
So that's the big difference between sales and marketing. So what you need to do to leverage the message that you are creating in marketing is to give the sales team tools, give them enablement, give them tools that they can use to deliver a message in a consistent way. So your story, your narrative, you have to give them all of the tools, and very often this will include a lot of PowerPoint slides. Give them PowerPoint slides so that if and when they need to, they can tell your story in a very effective and a very compelling way. But then what you have to do as well is to accept and embrace the idea that they need to make those tools their own. So it would never be a good thing to expect salespeople to mindlessly go through a standard sales presentation with every customer, because what's the point of that? You might as well just put a video out on YouTube, right? The whole point of a sales conversation is it's a conversation so the salespeople understand the particular situation, the particular pains that this customer has. And so I would always consider slides that you give to salespeople. There are very deliberate design methods you can use to make them very easily customizable. To make the amount of detail or duration that they spend on a particular part of a story very variable depending on who they're talking to. You can have slides that sort of explode in volume or collapse in volume depending on the desire of the salespeople, and then expect and encourage the salespeople to make these slides their own, which will be a combination of what they're hearing from their customer, but also personal preferences and personal passions. And I think that one of the best things you can hear back from a sales force, if you're asking about sales presentations, is so you go to your salespeople and say, okay, so how do you like the company standard sales presentation? And the best thing that can happen in a way is they say, well, I don't know, I don't use it. It's like, oh, you don't use it? No, I don't use the standard sales presentation. I use my own presentation. It's like, oh, that's fantastic. Can you show me your own presentation? And when they show it to you, it's all built on these slides that you produced, right? But they don't view it as your presentation. They view it as their presentation because they've customized it. They've moved things around. They've maybe embellished parts of it, and they've made it their own. And that's really your goal, because you can have all this customization happening and all this listening happening in the sales force, but the message is still transmitting through. The same story is underpinning everything, and the message is just getting amplified at each stage.
Yeah. That's the best compliment you can get if a salesperson is adapting the sales deck from yours. What are the common mistakes product marketers make that can cause great negative impacts on the decision journey or take a toll on the decision journey?
Well, I don't know about product marketers specifically, but I think there are lots of possible mistakes. One mistake is to be confused about what stage you're writing for. That's a potential mistake where you're sort of mixing apples and oranges in your buyer's journey, and so you can produce content which is just very difficult for anyone in particular to digest. And another thing, of course, that can go wrong, and it could be done by product marketing, but it would be more likely probably not be done by product marketing, is just producing horrible content, right? I mean, this is the danger with all of this whole sort of idea that has become content marketing, is that, of course, the reason content marketing exists is because someone figured out this is a cheaper way to get visitors to a website than paying Google, right? I mean, that's sort of, that is a strong aspect to all of this. And so then people start to write not for the audience, but for the search engines. They start to write for Google. They start to think about search engine optimization. And when that gets too much, I mean, you end up with content where the only purpose of that content was to get people to a website. But then the danger here, and this is a big danger, I think, in sophisticated B2B, and it's a danger that people don't think about enough, is that, wait a minute, what if someone actually reads this stuff? What if your site metrics are looking fantastic? You're driving loads of content to your website. You're super happy about how it's converting. But wait a minute, these are actual people, and they actually read that junk. And so what is the detrimental impact that has on your brand? What's the impact? Because if you end up with this bunch of stuff that like technically converts, but it's nonsense, it's rubbish, it's appalling, it's like something that the audience knew when they were 5 years old in high school, but they're CFOs, or they're in some sort of advanced position. They're the sales operations managers or something like that, and you're writing to them about this nonsense that it's just. I think you need to be very careful, much more careful, I think, than people are today, with the quality of the content that gets pushed out at the top of the funnel. Because, let's face it, when you look on the internet, if you are looking in a competitive space, by which I mean a space where a lot of people want to market, if you're looking into a competitive space, most of what you find is junk. It's awful, right? I mean, it's like content killed the internet. It's just horrible. So, I think that's also something to watch out for.
Yeah. So let's go beyond the basics. Are there more advanced ways to think about this whole buyer journey?
Yeah, I think there are. I think that like any concept in marketing, I think that it's important to fully understand the concept, to understand how to operate within that framework. But then there are sometimes opportunities that you can sort of go beyond that, or that you can break some of the rules in a way that can work well. So one of the a sort of general approach for doing this is that it is possible to seed concepts from later stages in the funnel into content created for earlier stages in the funnel. Let me sort of talk about that so your later funnel stages. You're going to be talking about product advantages, right? Let's say you have a system, and what the advantage of that system is speed, right? It's really fast, and it could be a financial consolidation system, it could be something in cybersecurity, it could be anything, but it's very fast, right? So obviously, when someone eventually gets to that point, when they're going through the consideration process, when they're looking at your product content, they're going to see the concept of speed, very, very visibly. But then, as you think about producing content which is for an earlier stage, then are there smooth ways that you can introduce some of those concepts to that earlier stage content. Let's say you're writing about best practices. You're writing about best practices, for doing something, whether it's cybersecurity, financial consolidation. You might write about obstacles. Let's say your goal is to close the books more quickly. What are the obstacles to a fast close? What are the obstacles to data protection? And as you sort of write about those obstacles, you can introduce some of these ideas that are going to come back later in your marketing. So, there are some sort of sophisticated ways to do early stage content that prepare people mentally for what they're going to see as product advantages later. But if you're going to do that, they need to do it well. So the way you do that is you're still not, if you're at the sort of top of the funnel, you're still not pitching your product. You're just talking about issues that you're going to address later. So you're sort of setting yourself up for success a bit further down the line.
To hook some differentiators into the early content, would that be dangerous?
No, I mean this is what you can do. Let's say if you differentiate around speed, let's say, you can start to talk about that as an issue in earlier stage content, but without talking about your product at all.
Yeah.
There are also some good ways of doing this even in a single piece of content where you do actually sort of start from a business problem and you take it all the way through to the product itself. But that's that would then be more of a narrative that doesn't really sit at the beginning of the funnel. It's it's more of a connection piece that connects the business issues through to the product later.
Yeah, I see. So thank you for joining us today to share your expertise with our audiences. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, a product marketing community that gives back. Check out our website, productmarketinghive.com, to join our community, meet fellow product marketers, and access free resources, including training, playbooks, templates, and events. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and give a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. See you next time.